revolutionary about Genesis chapter 10. And I'm going to do the whole chapter today. I'm not going to spend 3 weeks breaking down all these nations. We're just going to cover them and kind of swiftly move on to chapter 11 next time together. But what's so key is that there's still not a lot of ancient literature that really explains how did nations come about? How did they get there? This is like the oldest log of the nations, and it all goes back to God. And by the way, you're going to find out God created nations for a reason. Now, today we're in Genesis chapter 10, but Genesis 10 actually follows Genesis 11. In other words, these two chapters are not chronological in their writing. The author, Moses, wants you to see there's going to be 70 nations that God's going to create. But why did he create them? You'd have to go to the next chapter, and he goes, let me tell you why. This is what happened. And what happened is the nations, the people, chose not to spread out as God told them to. Be fruitful, multiply, canvass the earth. But they decided, no, we want to be globalist. We want a European Union. We want a world order. We want, under Nimrod's leadership, to come together and collude against God. We want to build our own tower, make a name for ourselves. We don't want to do what God says. And God wouldn't have anything to do with it. So God scatters them. And they, all of a sudden, he gives them different languages, so they can't collude together. They can't understand each other. That we're going to get next time together in Genesis 11. But it starts in Genesis 10 and says, that's what happened. Let me tell you what came out of that. These are not 70 nations that voluntarily did what God said and then had their own distinct ethnicity with their own distinct culture and their own distinct national orientation. These are 70 nations as a result of God forcing them to spread out, God confounding them because of their disobedience. And so we're going to kind of see that. But they're all listed for us, and it's incredible. It gives us an incredible history that lets us know, first off, that our God, that is the God of the Bible, is the God of all nations. God cares about China. He cares about Russia. He cares about Iran. He cares about all nations and all peoples. But he's not the God of all of them in a personal, intimate sense, because all 70 were disobedient. After you get through Genesis 10 and 11, you get to Genesis 12, which we've already looked at with Abraham. God's like, because none of the nations were untainted, because all of them were fallen and broken, all of them were disobedient, all of them were globalists, all of them colluded for an evil purpose, I, God, am going to have to create my own nation. I'm going to have to raise up my own people. And he reserves the term nation for the ethnicities of the world, and he uses the term peoples for the Hebrews, the Jewish people. They will have to be a chosen group that will be a blessing, by the way, to even these fallen, rebellious nations, but there'll be salt and light to them, hopefully, to bring them to God. So today we have kind of the original UN. You'll see in these 70 nations, Israel's not mentioned. There's no Hebrew nation here. Why? Because all of them are rebellious. You have to get to Genesis 12 where God goes, I can't use any of these. I'll have to create my own. So Israel's not even mentioned yet. We're not there yet. Now, this is the story of the original UN. We have a UN today. It doesn't have 70 nations. It has 193 of them. It was created, as many of you might be aware, back in 1945 after World War II. It is secular, like these nations were. It's a convoluted enterprise, in my opinion, very progressive, very globalist, very humanistic. Our UN today is very godless, like it was in Genesis 10. So apparently we haven't made any progress on that. In fact, in the UN today, one nation gets singled out more than any other. Its stated purpose in the UN is to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, achieve international cooperation, serve as a center for harmonizing the actions of the nations. Okay, that sounds like a noble goal, but they pick on one nation that they say continually is an egregious offender of these purposes for freedom and tolerance. I wonder if you can guess what single nation the UN continues to pick on. Even though this nation has 7 million citizens, a fifth of them are Arab, the government is a vibrant democracy, it has a free press, religious freedom is well respected there. One nation gets picked on more than any other in the UN. Israel. God's chosen nation. What a surprise. What a surprise. We don't have time to go into all the history, but I'll give you a few examples. If you go just to the first 5 or 6 years of the UN, 38% of all the resolutions by the United Nations Human Rights Council, in other words, resolutions against a nation they think was a violator in some way, 38% of them were regarding Israel alone. Just this month, I mean, I just saw it in the headlines this week. They just appointed Iran as the chair of the next UN Human Rights Forum. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, what? This regime, which brutally oppresses its own citizens, is now, this week, the head of the new UN Human Rights Council. Oh, wow. That's as good as Genesis 10. Yeah, in those first 4, 5, 6 years of the UN, they published 48 reports condemning Israel. 9 of them condemned Syria's mass killings and torture of its own citizens. 3 of them were on Iran's genocide threatening regime. Not one was on China, which, you know, billions of people don't even have elementary freedoms there. So 3 on Iran, 9 on Syria, 48 on Israel, and that's it. Those are their big, I mean, it's just cuckoo. In 2001, they had the Durban Conference, which turned into an anti-Israel, anti-Jew propaganda conference. And they came out of that conference saying of all the bad actors in the world, there is one that is guilty of racial discrimination. Guess what nation? Israel. That's the only one. There's only one country in the world whose very legitimacy is questioned. There's only one country in the world who's threatened with annihilation regularly. That country is Israel. It's the country that was not included in Genesis 10 because all 70 nations were rogue, rebellious, evil, colluding against God. And even today, I'm not here to defend Israel like they're like totally like God-fearing and aligned, but it still is God's choice, and they still continue to like wreak havoc from the nations. So today we're going to look at Genesis 10 to understand it. Next week we'll look at Genesis 11. How did this happen? Well, it happened because God had to force it. They didn't spread out on their own. God had to make it happen. We'll see today that there are 3 basic groups because Noah has how many sons? 3. So those 3 sons are going to spread out and give us like a tripartite arrangement, a threefold, if you will, division of mankind, because those 3 sons are going to spread out. And all the nations, all the peoples of the world are going to come from those 3 sons. So we're going to have the Japheth and Shem and Ham. We're going to have the Japhethic people of Europe and, you know, the Aryan peoples. You're going to have the Semitics, the Assyrians, the Hebrews, some of the Arabs. You're going to have the Hamitic, Egyptians, Ethiopians, Babylonians, and so forth. And they're going to be listed throughout Genesis 10 for us. So you're going to see that even though today, right, there's a total preoccupation on different races, we're not different races. We all came from Adam, and then we all came from Noah after the flood. One race, one people. Different ethnicities, different cultures, and because of Babel, God gave them different languages, and they're going to grow up with different traditions and stuff, but we're one people, even though today they're always talking about different races, race wars, and no. We're one people, united, with different backgrounds. So we're going to see 14, 30, and 26 different families from these 3 brothers for a total of 70. Israel's not going to be mentioned. Only the sons are going to be mentioned because in the old writings it always kind of was through the patriarch, through the father, and through the sons, even though obviously there's daughters and others that are equally important. Only the sons are going to be listed. 70 is a big number for Israelis, so you're going to see a lot of sevens and a lot of 70s, a lot of symbolism in this particular passage. And of course, this is a result of really their pride and their collusion. And that's why today, if we're to be practical, we want to support nations as best we can. Nations are a God-created hedge against global collusion for evil. So any globalist attempt to bring the world under one power source, one dominator, one tyrant, one ruler, even if it's a benevolent ruler, as soon as it's not a benevolent ruler, we're going to be in trouble because all the dominoes would fall, quickly. So as we saw in World War II with Hitler, he had to deal with Poland, and then he had to deal with France, and he had to deal with Belgium, and he had nations he had to start to knock off, and then the other nations had time, like England, and then America ended up entering, and then the Soviet Union, to be a hedge against his spreading evil. But can you imagine if he was in charge of the whole world? Once you have a Nazi, the head of Germany, you'd have a Nazi, the head of the world. And that's a little bit what's happening today, is this globalist movement, which of course is super dangerous for us who believe that as long as man is sinful, as long as mankind is broken, theologically we say depraved, as long as every fiber of his being is still impacted by evil, even though man can do good because we're still created in the image of God and he can do noble things, he still has the propensity to do evil. And as long as that propensity exists, we want to make sure there's hedges, what we might call in America checks and balances, different ways so that if we get a little cuckoo, there's a protection against kind of it all falling apart. We saw when we studied Noah, of course, he was given a blessing, the rainbow and a covenant, and that blessing was to be for all the nations, so we definitely want that. As I mentioned, there's going to be lots of multiples of 7 in this and 70s. And then if you get to the New Testament, you're going to see even the Apostle Paul say something like this in Acts 17, verse 26. God determined the times set for the nations and the exact places where they should live. Paul recognizes in the New Testament the nations and the people groups that are out there. God actually set that, referring back to really what Moses communicated in Deuteronomy 32, that God gave the nations their inheritance when he divided all mankind. Mankind didn't spread out on his own. God had to divide them. God had to spread them out because of their disobedience. So today, we're in Genesis 10. Are you ready to go? We're going to kind of just jet tour it. I don't know how many of these words I'm going to pronounce correctly, so just be as gracious as you can. We'll get through it. Here we are in Genesis 10, starting in verse 1. This is the account. In other words, this is the record, or of the descendants of the generations of Shem, Ham, Japheth, Noah's 3 sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. So we're going to look at the 3 sons, by the way, and they have sons, and it's going to continue. So we're going to get like a little genealogy here. And of course, they've already weathered the trauma of the flood, so they have a little PTSD, but they're ready to propagate and get going. And by the way, these 70 nations are going to be named after people. So all the people become, this is the land of Dave, the land of Alice, the land of Victor, Victorville. There you go. I love it. Yeah, see, you already have a city named after you, so you don't get 2. Kind of reminds me of the Catholic missionaries here in California, because they named a lot of cities after faith. We have Los Angeles, named after angels. We have Santa Fe, named after Holy Faith. We have our capital, named after the sacraments, Sacramento. But we have a lot of cities named after people. Like Diego is Saint Diego or San Diego. and named after Monica. We have Santa Monica, Saint Monica. I was born in Santa Barbara, named after Barbara, and you can go up the coast, right? Francisco, right? San Francisco. So what about Jose? Don't forget him. San Jose. So Catholics named a lot of cities after good people. All these 70 nations are names of people. They all became regions. They all became a San Diego, a San Francisco, or a Victorville. Verse 2, the sons of Japheth are these, and 7 founding fathers are going to be listed here. Gomer, really his descendants moved into Germany and Wales. Magog, these are going to be the Russians, by the way, today. Their leader is going to be called Gog, which is a term for like Pharaoh and Caesar. We're going to see them show up in Ezekiel, right, in the end, the prophecy for the end when they come against Israel. Madai, these settled in Persia and later in India. Javan, these are the father of the Greek people. Tubal and Meshech, probably northern Armenia, also part of Russia today. And Tyros. And then we get the 7 grandsons of Japheth. The sons of Gomer are Ashkenaz. They probably founded Germany. Riphath, the Riphaean mountains kind of show the region. They kind of off north of the Caspian Sea. Togarmah, they're identified with the Armenians, the Phrygians. By the way, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Togarmah, a lot of these are going to be mentioned in Ezekiel. In other words, the Japheth line is going to be hostile to Israel in the end times. And they're forecasted here. We're just in Genesis 10. But when we get to the end, they're going to show up again. The sons of Javan, verse 4, Elisha of Grecian stock. Tarshish probably founded the southwest coast of Spain, maybe even Carthage, north of Africa, if you will. The Kittites, they're the people of Cyprus, also known to be on the shores of Italy and Greece. The Houdinites, from them, the maritime people spread out into their territories by their clans, within their nations, each with its own language. Verse 5, language. Well, they were all one language prior to the Tower of Babel. So we know this is all after the Tower of Babel. This is just setting up the table. We'll see what happened in chapter 11. So there we have some of the folks. Starting in verse 6, we're going to get now to the Hamitic people. The first group was kind of like the most removed from Israel, so I think they're done first. These are going to be the most hostile to Israel, and of course this is a writing for the people of God. So it's like, let me tell you who you're going to be dealing with. These are going to be vigorous, aggressive people that are going to be hostile to you, and they're still hostile today, by the way. The sons of Ham, 4 of them are mentioned. Cush, typically identified with Ethiopia, maybe a little bit Arabia and Babylonia and India. Egypt, or can be translated Misraim. These are the Egyptians in the upper and lower part of Egypt. Put, typically identified with Libya today, still somewhat a hostile territory. And then Canaan, very hostile to God. And then we have now 7 grandsons of Ham, the sons of Cush. 5 are listed: Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabtaka. These are typically in the Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf area. You can watch the news and see what's going on in the Persian Gulf today. Then you have the sons of Ramah. 2 of them are mentioned, Sheba and Dedan, still in the Persian Gulf area. Now we're going to have, okay, so he's giving a little bit of a genealogy, and now he's going to say, let me tell you about Gavin Newsom. Let me give you a moment to learn about one of the most progressive guys. This is Justin Trudeau, if you will, and Emmanuel Macron, if you're French. Let me tell you who was the progressive globalist of the day. His name was Nimrod. So it gives a genealogy, of these people who formed regions like Victorville, named after the people. But he's like, let me highlight one of them in particular who was really a George Soros of his day. Very destructive. Probably the kind of the architect of the globalist world order of the day. His name, Nimrod, comes from marad, which means to revolt or to rebel. So even from birth, probably Cush influenced him to be a rebel. He grew up like a lot of Palestinians today or others that they grow up hating the people of God. That's part of the culture. And he's a prime mover in tyranny, if you will, using kind of a modern term. He's like the first globalist empire builder, Nimrod. I was seeing an article this week, I don't know if you saw it, but it said controligarchs. Did any of you see that in controligarchs? And it lists Bill Gates, David Rockefeller, George Soros, Ted Turner, Michael Bloomberg, Warren Buffett, and Oprah Winfrey, along with corporations like Cisco, Blackstone, and Tiger Management. And it just talked about how they're colluding together to try to take over the world and control vaccines, medicine, education, everything, facial recognition, like they want you controlled. Nimrod started that. He's the beginning. And so he's highlighted here. Moses takes the time to kind of go, let me make sure you're tracking with what's going on here. Verse 8, Cush was the father of Nimrod. He's the youngest son of Cush, who became a mighty warrior. We might say a better term for that today would be he became a world elite on the earth. He was a hero, by the way, to the godless in the ancient world. He was kind of like bin Laden. People love seeing America go down and loved him like pushing against the West. People love Nimrod for that. Like, he is such a rebel, and he's so destructive. He had a heroic. Verse 9 says he was a mighty hunter. Some translations say before the Lord. I don't think that's the best way to translate it. Before is really better, means against. He was a mighty hunter against the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter against the Lord. He had a grandiose vision opposite of what God wanted. He was hostile to God. He was a predator. He was a hunter, so he did hunt animals, but he hunted people too. Kind of like bin Laden and his people might look for terrorists. You know, they want to get destructive people. BLM, CRT. Let's take down Portland, Minneapolis. Let's protest. Let's do crazy. So Nimrod is kind of the original Hamas, if you will, the leader of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or something. So Moses takes a little time to say, I'm giving you a lot of names, but let me highlight Nimrod because you want to keep your eyes on him. Anyways, we press on. Verse 10, what did he do? Well, the first centers of his kingdom, that's Nimrod's, were Babylon. This is where Babel initiated. Babylon is Sin City. I mean, it might be the equivalent of like a Las Vegas today, right? Super cool, right? They host the Grand Prix. And then every sin that we don't talk about, because what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Welcome to Babylon. You know, Nimrod, he loved that. He would have been on the strip for sure. And it lists really some of his conquest, Uruk, Akkad, and Calanque in Shinar, which is Assyria. And then from that land, verse 11, he went to Assyria. So he establishes Babylon, and then he establishes Assyria, where he built a city called Nineveh. Do any of you remember the story of Jonah, right? So Nineveh, Jonah so didn't want to go to Las Vegas that he ran from God, right? And God has to like swallow him up in a whale and kind of dump him in Nineveh and say, well, you're going to USC and you're going to share there, okay? Because he cares for those people. He cares for all people. It lists Rehoboth, Caleb, Rezin, which is between Nineveh, Calah, and which is a great city. It now gives in verse 13, 7 sons of Misraim, or 7 sons of Egypt, if you will. Egypt was the father of Ludites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtuhites, Pethruzites, Casluhites, Caphtorites, mosquito bites. I don't know. I think it's in there. And then we got 11 descendants of Canaan. Canaan's a problem. He was mentioned earlier in the Noah story. Remember, he's the one Noah curses. He says he's going to be a curse because of what his dad did and what he did. Anyways, Canaan was the father of, and it's going to list now, 11 sons. Of course, daughters aren't mentioned, but he had them, of course. Sidon, his first. Sidon is today Syria, modern day Syria, which is just a bastion. You want to take a vacation there, right? I mean, come on. No, you don't want to go there. And the Hittites. And then 9 sons that follow here are all from Canaanite tribes: the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, that's probably China, Arvadites, Zemarites, Hamathites, and more mosquito bites, I don't know. All of these nations from Canaan are very vile. These nations are so vile that when we get later in Scripture, God's going to want to exterminate them. Like, they have to be eliminated. Almost like he did with the flood. Like with the Nephilim and the evil and the demonic activity, it got so crazy, God's like, I got to wipe this out. They're going to get so evil, these hostile people to God, that later God's going to have some plans for them. Anyways, it says, later the Canaanite clans scattered, verse 19, and the borders of Canaan reached from Sidon towards Gerar as far as Gaza, and then towards some really cool cities like Sodom. Gomorrah, we already know a little bit about them, right? Those are not good cities, right? That is New Orleans and Philadelphia. I don't know. Admah, Zebulun, as far as Lasha, verse 20. These are the sons of Ham by their clans, their languages, their territories, and their nations. Of course, it's listing languages again, which we know is post-Babel. So they wouldn't have had different languages before. This is just giving you the precursor. So we get through 2 of the sons and some of the key people you need to know. That'll give you a little bit of history if you want that. Now, a lot of us, we skip this chapter because we're like, I don't need to know all that. But now that the world is unfolding, you can go back and God, he recorded it for us. So we understand it. Now he gets to the Semitic people. This is last because this is the climax. Because remember, the lineage, the royal lineage that leads to Christ, is going to come through the line of Shem, and then through Eber, which is where we're going to get the Hebrew name, and then Christ will follow. So these are going to be listed last. The sons were also born to Shem, verse 21, whose older brother was Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of all the sons of Eber. The Hebrew people come from Eber. That's why that's mentioned there. The sons of Shem, 5 are listed: Elam, Asher, Arphaxad. Arphaxad is going to be part of the royal line that's going to lead to Abraham, which is going to lead to Christ. So write that one down, Arphaxad. That's a good Scrabble word, you know. When you've got an X, a couple A's, and you're like, what do I want to go with? And you go, I'm going with Arphaxad. And they're like, what? It's like, come on, you don't know who that is? Hello. Not as cool as Elijah and Nora, but Arphaxad. Maybe for your next child, Carter. What do you think? People go, I don't think I've met an Arphaxad before. You go, you haven't. That's awesome. Then we have Lud, Aram. The sons of Aram are listed: Uz, Hud, Gether, and Meshach. Uz is the home. That's where Job lived, by the way. So that's that territory. And then it unpacks Arphaxad. He was the father of Shelah. And Shelah was the father of Eber. Why is that mentioned for us? Because Eber is going to be the foundation of the Hebrews. So that just gives you, it kind of lines that up for you. The 2 sons were born to Eber, maybe more, but 2 are listed. One was Peleg. Peleg means divided. So it's probably named right after the dispersion of the Tower of Babel, because the time of the earth was divided. And his brother was named Joktan. Joktan was the father of, and it lists 13 of his sons: Almadad, Sheleph, Hazaramaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimal, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, Jobab, and all of these were sons of Joktan. And the region where they lived stretched from Mesha towards Sephar in the eastern hill country. These are the sons of Shem by their clans, their languages, their territories, and their nations. So, goodness sakes, we got through some of those. So, we got 3 sons, and it says, look, I'm not going to name everything. It's not exclusive. It's not comprehensive. But these are the ones you need to watch as history unfolds. 3 sons. One son went north, fortunately. One son goes south, and Shem is kind of in the center, and in the center of the center is Jerusalem. And that is like the apex of 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. So God says, I have a chosen people coming, and I have a chosen parcel of land. It is the center of the world. And it is the center today. And it's the center of your news station, because even though it's teeny, it's kind of the apex of all these nations and people groups. 70 are listed. There's probably more, because 70 is a super important number for Israel. They have 70 weeks of Daniel 9. We have 70 cycles. We have 70 elders mentioned in Numbers 11. We have 70 members of the Sanhedrin. We got 70 scholars who did the Septuagint. We have Moses, who said the lot for a man's life is at least 70 years. The Babylonian captivity was 70 years, so it's kind of a special number. So, any questions on the Jebusites or any of those specific tribes? Because I can go into more detail if you want. Okay. You're good? Okay, so in conclusion today, this is it's a packed chapter, but we just knocked the whole chapter out. It's filled with lots of names, lots of nations, lots of genealogies, lots of geography, which you're tempted, at least I am, to get in the Bible and go, skip, let's just move on. But we didn't want to skip it because it's very revolutionary. It is the most ancient record of how the nations came to be and who they were. And they're listed by name and genealogy, and the line of Christ is listed for us, so we can follow that. And we can see like how they spread out and what they did. I don't know of anyone, even in all my great years at UCLA, no one could understand or explain, how did we get all these nations? How did we get all these languages? How did all this ethnic diversity come about when we're from one people, one Adam, one Noah? Genesis 10 says, well, let me give you the list, and next week we'll see in Genesis 11. Let me tell you how we got there. And we didn't get there voluntarily because people obeyed God and decided, you know what, let's do what he said. Let's spread out and let's all build little communes and communities and build families of faith. No, they were all rebellious. They were all like our globalists today. They all want to take over. They all want to collude. They all want a social network system. They all wanted to follow a Nimrod. They all wanted to be hostile to God. They were godless. And so God says, I'm going to list them for you because 1, I want you to be able to follow what's going to happen in history. 2, I want to list them for you so that you know that I am the God of all nations. Israel's not even mentioned here yet. We haven't even gotten there yet. I'll choose a select nation or a select people group, but it's to bless these nations, even though they're hostile. God is so merciful. But they're kind of hostile to you. He cares about Nancy Pelosi. It's like, what? You're kidding. Chuck Schumer? It's like, he cares about all people. Now, even if they're hostile, even if they don't live according to the code that you feel God would have you to live, even though they have a different orientation, God says, I have a people group and their goal is to be a blessing to all people. And then in the first century when Christ comes, he's like, if you're not going to do that, then I'm also going to go to the Gentiles and I'm going to graft the Gentiles in. I'm not done with Israel, but I'm going to graft the Gentiles in, and you, Gentiles, can also now be part of the family of faith, thanks to what Christ has done for us. And you can be salt and light to the nations. We're not going to just wait on Israel to do that. I'll use you. But he didn't throw Israel away. He's just, I'm going to graft you in. because I am determined, even in the end, even with globalists, even with progressives, even with people that are into, wokeism. I want you to love them. I want you to try to win them. I want you to try to care for them. I want you to try to point them to the true God. And if not, then I have my plans to deal with them in the end. You don't have to do that. I will do that. But be smart too. While you live here in Babylon, modern Babylon, when Nimrod starts to do his Babel plan, I almost had a heart attack when Biden says, our plan is build back better. I'm like, you're kidding me. That couldn't be more clear than build Babel again. That's what they want. But it's okay. We already know that. But we know God's for us. We know we're here to make a difference. We could all run to Idaho. I was in Idaho last week. I'm like, I could get a bunker here and I don't think they'd find me. But that's not our purpose. Our purpose isn't to hide and hunker down somewhere. Our purpose is to make a difference. We live in Corinth, people. It's cuckoo land here, but this is where the light is needed, in the midst of the darkness. So yeah, we can go hide in Tennessee or somewhere in Dallas or something and go, good, we're all with Christians. Look, we're going to do that in heaven. We're going to have all eternity to do that. You want to live in hostile territory, and you couldn't pick a better place than the city of demons. Angels. So what we've said today is the first control oligarch wasn't Bill Gates, Rockefeller, or Soros. It was Nimrod. God plans out the Blackstone strategy of the ancient world. Today, we're just heads up because we know history's repeating itself. People are still fallen. As long as there's sin, we need nations and hedges and protections. So we want to do all we can. I read an article last night. I just got back from my game last night, turned on my little cell phone with news, and a Globalist magazine had this. It's just so, you can't even make this stuff up. Donald Trump is the biggest danger to the world was the headline. So I'm like, okay, what does Globalist magazine have to say about that? And one of the guys who made a commentary about it said, the magazine doesn't try to explain why a former real estate investor and TV host has become a bigger danger to the world than disease, mass migration, or the elite's refusal to look at the diplomatic fix for the war with a nuclear-armed Russia. They don't care to explain it. They just gave you the headline. He's the biggest danger. Well, you know why he's the biggest danger? Or one of them. He's a nationalist. He's not a globalist. That's Globalist magazine. That's Nimrod's publication. This is Genesis 10, repeating itself. They don't like Russia either, by the way, because they're not globalists. So any nation that says, no, we want Russia first, thank you, Putin. We want America first, thank you, Trump. That's hostile to the globalist takeover, which they've already tried through the pandemic and other means. And their strategy is like, what could affect every nation in the world? How about something like climate? How about something like climate change? Because that affects everyone. And then we can get the whole world aligned. Whatever. You know what they're doing. Don't get sucked in. Genesis 10 gives us a good start and a good reminder that nations were created by God, not by nations, by God as a hedge against evil, because when nations get together without those distinctives, they collude and they're hostile to God. We know better. There's one true control oligarch, the sovereign over all, and he's the one we worship. Amen?
Amen.